I've been doing some reading. Okay. First of all, I don't want to go there. I'm going to go to Matthew's account, Matthew 26:1. We get there. The problem that we have with Easter, okay, and I haven't looked at any particular material, but there's been it was a few hundred years, I imagine, after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus that some people wanted to start a special ceremony, a special service or a mass for this. And as typically happens, they wanted it to be associated with, not necessarily associated with, but in competition with a pagan celebration. So they decided to call it Easter because there were pagans who worshiped the goddess Ishtar. Okay, and that's where the word Easter essentially comes from. So they created that day, and with that day, then they created another day, Good Friday, and claimed that Jesus was crucified on Friday, rose again on Sunday. All right? So that's the basis of Ishtar, a pagan religion brought into the evolving human aspect of Christianity by not the early church, not the first century church, but a couple centuries later. So there was one place in the King James Version where it talks about Paul wanted to be somewhere by Easter. And when scholars would say, hey, you know, Easter's not in there. Well, yeah, it is right here. It's in our Bible, but it was a bad translation. What they did, they translated it more in a modern way for Easter than what the Greek word that's there for Passover. Paul wanted to be someplace by Passover. And I think I've told you before, there was an effort by some to expunge everything Jewish. That's why we talk about Jesus instead of Joshua or Yeshua. They wanted to get rid of that Jewish aspect that was there. So with the King James Version, Easter becomes a prominent part of it. But it's not something that's in the original scriptures. So, verse 17. We'll go here in Matthew to get the idea of what we're talking about. Why Easter, at least as Christianity celebrates it, is placed in a proper place, proper date or chronology, other than say something like Christmas. That is, there's really no biblical foundation for it. Jesus was probably born in the spring, and you can tell that by various things through the scriptures. So here's how it's presented. And now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus saying, where will you have us prepare for you to eat the Passover? Passover is going to be the most important dating aspect of it. Because with the Jews and their use of a lunar calendar, it was always going to be the same day, same time of the year. Same month, same day, every year. It's going to be the same. Because all of their months started with a new moon, which is no light, right? Nope, new moon. Then you've got 7 days to a quarter moon, and 7 days to a half moon, 7 days to the full moon, and 14 days. And the full moon is how they determined when Passover would be. It would be the 15th or the 14th or 15th of the month, but it'd always be on the full moon after the spring equinox. Now, the spring equinox, March 20th, right? So why isn't Easter, as it's called, always on the same day of the year, since that's when spring? Well, that spring equinox in our calendar, which is a solar calendar, that may be on a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It can be any day of the week. But for them, it would be the first day of the week and the first day of the month. So when the full moon comes, that's when they're going to celebrate Passover. And the Passover, it's going to be the same day. All right? So if the first day of the month is the first day of the month, then you have 7, then you have 7 more, that's 14 days. What day is that always on?
Either Saturday or Sunday.
It'd be Saturday, wouldn't it? Yeah. And Sunday be the 15th. So, why did Jesus eat the Passover on Wednesday night and the Sadducees, or the chief priests, eat it on Thursday night? Well, again, it goes back, and if you do a deeper study of it, you find out that there were conflicts about calendars even back in those days, because who was in charge? Rome, right? The Romans were in charge, and so but you will see that if you will put all 4 gospel accounts together, you see that okay, I'll just make the statement. Here's what I believe. Okay? Here's what I believe. If you start with the triumphal entry that we know happens on the 8th, which is the second Sunday, our Sunday of the month, all right? What would be their month? That's on the 8th. The next, he goes into town, he goes into Jerusalem, he goes to the temple, he looks around, he leaves, and he goes back out to the Mount of Olives. Okay? He comes in the next day, Monday, and what does he do? He cleanses the temple, right? He drives out the money changers and such. If you look at then what happened the next day and the next day, you find out that there's only 4 days then of activity going on: the Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Thursday, it's like Thursday's not even there. Okay? If Jesus was crucified on Friday, there's nothing there for Thursday. If he's crucified on Thursday, then you could understand where there'd be silence on Friday and Saturday, and then everything explodes on Sunday morning, right? Okay. So just the chronology of what the gospel accounts are talking about, you get that impression. Now, what I was talking about, well, why did Jesus eat the Passover on Wednesday, and then the chief priest did it on Thursday night? Well, how do we know that? Well, because Jesus did it before he was crucified, right? That's just plain common sense. But if you look at John's account, you see that John says they had to hurry up and get him off the cross because they didn't want to defile themselves for eating the Passover, and that's the chief priests and stuff. So they did it on a Thursday night. But that was after Jesus was crucified. They needed to get him off the cross. So you can see there were differences even back then. But we have, I think we have through the scriptures a more, so that, how do I want to put it? the week of unleavened bread should have started on Sunday, on the first day of unleavened bread, okay? But here, it's Wednesday, to me, as you're going through it. So they're getting ready, they're preparing the Passover. It was a week of festivity. Why? I don't know, I can't go back and figure out a lot of it. But the way the scripture presents it, that's the way it should have been. I'd accept Jesus' position on it more than what I would anybody else's. All right. So does that help you understand why? Okay. The first full moon after the spring equinox. Okay. So if the spring equinox, if the full moon, because they had a, excuse me, lunar calendar, okay? If the spring equinox, how do I want to say this? If there's a full moon at the spring equinox, okay, right at that day or within like a couple days, it's going to go forward 28 days. That's why sometimes it's pretty late in April that you have Easter. Okay? Sometimes it's early, sometimes it's the last part of March.
Yeah, I noticed that.
And that's the reason why. It's where is the sun, okay, or what state is the moon in at the time of the spring equinox? So for them, it wouldn't make any difference because they used the lunar calendar. It makes a difference translating it out to our time because of going from lunar to solar.
Makes sense.
That help?
So that, the Good Friday thing that these people observe, is that a Catholic thing, or is that?
Yes.
So where did Monday, Thursday come in at?
Well, Monday, Thursday, that many celebrate is going back to this, okay, when he reclined at table with the 12, actually eating Passover.
Okay.
And that's the institution. Well, it really isn't the institution of the Lord's Supper. It's the pattern for when the Lord's Supper is instituted, when he eats it the first time with his disciples after his resurrection. This is what you're going to do. And most scholars will say it's taking the last part of the Passover ceremony. Okay, the last things that they would do. So if you go back to Passover in the book of Exodus, and you see what they had to do that night, it's kind of like projecting through history what God is doing. All right? And so this last part becomes, this is what the Christ is coming to do, or Messiah. Okay, that's their word. Messiah, he's coming, and that's the final stage of this Passover deal. And that's why Paul says that Christ is our Passover. Okay? We don't celebrate Passover anymore. Why? Because the Old Testament's been done away with. Okay? But that doesn't necessarily mean we should celebrate an Easter. Okay? What we celebrate is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus
Christ.
Okay. So Monday, Thursday, again, comes back to this was something that was added after Good Friday was added. All right? So in essence, if you were going to do it, if Jesus was crucified on Thursday, it should be Monday, Wednesday.
Because when I grew up in the Methodist church, I remember as a little child going on a Wednesday night and doing that Monday.
That's
Thursday.
Thursday night.
No, it was on a Wednesday.
It's not Monday, Thursday.
No,
You
it
can
was
do
on Thursday,
Wednesday.
that's right, on
Okay,
Thursday.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, okay.
And you see how that kind of then fits a pattern, all right? There's reasons there's reasoning behind these things that's not necessarily scriptural for. Okay, so why do I say Jesus was crucified on Thursday? Well, I told you most of it. A big part of it, I won't say most of it, but a big part of it is you've got Thursday, you got a day missing. Okay, you got Thursday missing if Jesus is crucified on Friday. It doesn't fit in the chronology. Second thing's prophecy. Remember what Jesus said? As Jonah was in the belly of the fish or the whale or whatever, earth or in the grave, he was going to be there for 3 days and 3 nights. Okay?
So if he was crucified on Thursday, does that mean after the Passover then that is when he went through the beatings and the crown of thorns and all that through the night, right? Because he was crucified, what, like at 3 o'clock in the afternoon?
No, he was crucified at 9 in the morning.
9
He
in the
was on the
morning,
cross
okay.
for about 6 hours.
So from the Passover until 9 in the morning is when
When
they
he
maybe,
celebrated Passover.
Not
was
with the disciples?
It was the next day after he celebrated Passover with his disciples.
With his disciples.
And that's what I was saying. It's I don't know why Wednesday and why the chief priest did it on Thursday
'cause that's
after he
why
was
I'm-
crucified.
That's why I'm kind of lost, because I'm thinking, okay,
Because it should
If
be on
he-
Saturday.
you know, because if he celebrated or, you know, had the Passover that evening with the disciples, and it's Wednesday, but yet he's crucified on Thursday, when did the torment and stuff before the crucifixion take place?
Oh, that was between like 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock. The 3 trials and the beatings
Right,
and
it was
all
all during
that.
the night, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's what
Well,
I'm trying to
it
get
was
my
in the
mind
morning.
wrapped around.
It was,
Remember, their day started at 6 o'clock at night.
instead of midnight.
So, for them, their Sunday started 6 o'clock last night.
Okay,
Okay? That was night until 6 o'clock this morning, and then it's day. Night came first, then day.
okay,
All right?
maybe.
Yeah, just like in Genesis chapter 1. That's how they figured it. The Romans didn't. The Romans went from midnight to midnight. Okay? But again, night was first, wasn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah. So, Wednesday night, he meets with his disciples. They partake of the Passover. He said, do this in remembrance of me. This is how you're going to do it, and I'll partake of it with you in the kingdom. All right? Then, John's account. John chapter 13 talks about this. John 14, don't let your hearts be troubled. He knows what's going to happen. Judas goes out to betray him. They leave. They go to the Mount of Olives, and he's there at the Garden of Gethsemane. That evening, that night, he's arrested, and he's taken, and he's put on trial. Annas first, then Caiaphas, there are about 4 different trials, but eventually he ends up, it's Pilate. Pilate sends him to Herod. Herod sends him back to Pilate. And each time he's beaten
Right,
through those until he's beaten severely, and then early on what I believe Thursday morning, Pilate condemns him to death, and he's taken with the cross, along with the two insurrectionists, all right, to be
And
crucified.
then Simon is pulled out of the crowd to finish carrying Jesus' cross, right, to
Mhm.
place.
Yeah, that's while he's on the way to the cross. All right. So then you have him about 9 o'clock in the morning nailed to the cross, and you have the 7 sayings from the cross and all of this. I think it's noon is when the darkness starts, and that lasts for about 3 hours until he is dead. All right. And then
He actually died about 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
yes,
That's what I was thinking,
Yes.
that's where I was
And
getting
when
the
does
3
the dead
o'clock.
rise? After he dies?
it's after his
Curtains
resurrection,
torn
isn't
and all
it?
that?
Okay, and the Passover would have been like on Wednesday night with the disciples.
That's when
Yes. That's when he did it.
That's when he did it.
Did-
And then he's crucified, and that next evening, the Jewish leaders do it, and that's confusing. Why the two? See, that's never explained in the scriptures. And for the ones who say, well, it was Friday, that's why you have Good Friday. But
Okay, and so actually after the Passover is when they arrested him, and so more likely he was up all night long and through the trials and
Yes,
beatings.
yes, I knew that.
yes, yeah, he didn't get any sleep that
No
night.
sleep.
Didn't he have to be taken down because of, you said?
Because that's when the Jewish leaders,
Right.
you can't have have anybody on the cross for the Passover, all right? And they're getting prepared for that evening. But you have to go to John's account for that. Okay.
So the Roman law then is the one that crucified him, or the Jewish law?
The Romans crucified him, the Jews condemned him.
Condemned him, right.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And
Now, verse 51 there.
the curtain of the temple, wait, this is when he was crucified. 6th hour, there was darkness over the land until the 9th hour. The 6th hour would be noon. 9th hour, 3 o'clock. Okay, and about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, and then down, it's finished. He dies, he yields up his spirit. Curtains torn, earth shook, rocks split, tombs were opened. Many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and coming out of the tombs, look, after his resurrection. Oh, it was then after the resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many.
So then these people who were dead then stayed alive, or did they just come for a while and then die again, or what? Shortly? I mean, it doesn't say, does it?
We don't know. My surmising, there are a lot of people believe that from the Paul's letter to the Philippians, where it says that he led captivity captive and gave gifts to men. There's a huge segment of people out there who believe that when Jesus arose from the dead, he cleaned out Hades. All right? And when I say Hades, the unseen abode of the departed spirits. So people like Abraham, because it talks about Abraham's bosom, that they actually were resurrected then and have gone to heaven, or at least their spirits have gone to heaven. If that's the case, why would there be a general resurrection at the end? And they believe now that everybody, when they die, they just either go to heaven or to hell. But they're going to come back for the judgment. I don't hold to that, and there are particular reasons why. I think at the end, when he comes back and then there's the resurrection, that's when Hades is going to be. When those spirits come back to the bodies, then that's going to be destroyed. Hades, death and Hades will be cast into the lake of fire, which is hell. Okay? It's the end of death. No more death.
So do you think that when that happens, it'll be just a blink of an eye and we're up with God? Or sometimes I imagine you see all this slow everybody rising up to meet God. I don't know how
We're going to
that's gonna be.
experience it.
Yeah.
It's going to be like Jesus when he,
Ascended.
that's what, the prophecy of the angels. He's going to come in like manner, okay? And then what Paul says, we're we're going to be like him. We'll meet him in the air. Right?
Interesting.
That'd be scary enough as it is.
We'll be
Not
very
if-
but
hot
that's
at that
not if we have
point.
faith.
But that, with these resurrected bodies, they did not continue to live, or they'd be living today.
Right.
Either he took them at that time, which explains Paul's comment in the Philippian letter, or the bodies went back to the grave and the spirits went back to the Hadean realm to wait.
It's gonna be pretty freaky to see these dead bodies appear to you, you're like, whoa.
Well, they knew
were supposed to be
them, they
dead.
recognized them in town, see?
Yeah,
Those people knew them.
yeah.
Right. So, 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. Let me finish that as we close here. All right? So if we know it was first light, he's resurrected on Sunday morning, which would be Sunday night, right? Because night comes first. That's from 6 o'clock Sunday morning back to 6 o'clock Saturday night. That's night 1. Saturday morning back to Friday at 6 o'clock, night 2. He couldn't have been crucified on Friday. Where's night 3? You don't have that until you have him crucified on Thursday, okay? So then you have Thursday, we'll say it's Friday night because it's Thursday to Friday morning. So you have Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night. You have him in the grave Friday. That little bit on Thursday, Friday, Saturday day. Because there's a little bit of time before evening. And if it's on Friday, you don't even have that little bit. So a lot of say, oh, well, that's just figurative, 3 days and 3 nights. And they kind of throw some stuff out there. I don't think it stands the way that it happens, okay? So you have Saturday, Friday, and that little bit of Thursday to make the 3 days and 3 nights. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Okay. Am I absolutely 100 or 1,000% certain on it? I couldn't say it unless the scriptures. I'm telling you what the scriptures say. You get to make up your own minds about it. See, on all of this, like I have to make up my mind.
Amen.
Yeah, and
Good.
I can live with that. You know, I don't
Well-
want to have to tell anybody that they're.
And
You know.
if you think about it, we always say night is in our evening. But if we start the day at midnight, which we do, it's night at midnight till 6, 7 o'clock in the morning.
Mhm.
We have basically 2 nights per day. Half of it in the
Mhm.
morning and half in the evening.
Yeah, and you can see the wisdom of God.
You know? So, anyway,
And
I don't
again,
think,
uh, this-
God didn't set the calendar. I mean, he didn't set it at midnight.
Well, yes, he did.
Well,
Yes, he did. He said it, and it's at evening. What is evening?
to me, evening's
it'd
the
be
dusk.
afternoon.
To me, dusk is evening.
Well, it's dusk, but evening is when you have 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness. That's what the spring equinox is. Now, because of our time system, yeah, because of the sun, you know, where it is at a particular time, it's going to be different with us, but yet you can see the beauty of it. You know, it didn't matter how long an hour was to them, right? Not until there were sundials, you know, they come up with that. It didn't matter. You had day and you had night. In this particular time of the year, and in the fall, it's 12 and 12.
It's sort of like the farmer, their day starts at sunup, so.
They work from
Yes.
sun up to sundown.
Sometimes before, you know, they get up.
Well,
before
but I mean,
sundown.
that's when there's light, you know, they work, and when it's dark, they rest, so.
Right. Mhm.
Well, they had so many kids, it wouldn't. Anything else to do?
Yeah.
Right?
No, there's a lot of work to do, and it had to be done by hand.
My dad didn't know what the clock was, I mean,
Okay, so anyway, yeah, I know this is kind of thrown together and all,
That was good.
but if
Very
you,
good.
there are several things about this, you know, that if we look at, and to me, one of the biggest that people miss is the fact that Jesus was buried in a garden, not in a cemetery. And they knew where the grave was, the women knew where the grave was, because it was the only one there, and the guards were there in the morning when the women come, right after this earthquake opens the tomb, say, they are,
Were they,
they're still there.
you know how it says they were kind of frozen with fear? Were they still kind of like that when the ladies came up, or are they?
Yeah, it's maybe not frozen in fear that they can't move or anything, but it's, you know what, they've got the fear, number one, of the angel and what he's just done.
Right.
And then they got the fear, what's gonna happen to us because that tomb's empty.
he ain't there.
He ain't there.
We didn't take
And
care
we've
of it.
been here,
And that was,
and that was our job.
that was the other question I have, and obviously it doesn't say much about it. You know, we know that the guards went back and they told them to be quiet, and they wanted to make up these stories. But I always wondered what happened after they couldn't confirm anything, and you know, Jesus is gone, and time has elapsed, and you know, we don't know. But I wonder what the ones that crucified him finally decided was their answer why he was gone. Does that make sense?
It's still, the disciples took the body,
Okay.
but how could that be? Where were they? They were hiding.
Right.
So every argument that's thrown out there against the resurrection, just go back and say, well, it couldn't have been because here's what happened, you know, and here's the account of it.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank